With a huge derby against Manchester City on the horizon and the recent sacking of Dan Ashworth adding pressure to the situation around Manchester United, there are 3 critical defensive issues that he must address to be there for the long term. In this episode, I'll be exploring the key attacking patterns of play in Ruben Amorim's build-up and the 3 defensive situations that opponents thus far have exploited against Manchester United. And that's not all. In a bonus segment, I'll be exploring my best Man United 11 to face Man City and the key personnel decisions that Amorim has to make to decide the outcome of this clash. Now to start, let's look at the key attacking patterns of play that Amorim has already implemented in his first 4 Premier League games. And there have been 2 distinct movements in Amorim's build-up when in control possession of the ball. And they are the direct ball over the top for the wing-backs and the old school up, back and through where they'll play it to a forward player, back to the defensive midfielder and progress in between the opposition midfield and defensive lines. And we'll start with the direct ball over the top for the wing-backs. And we know Man United's basic shape now, so I don't have to get too deep into it, but it's the 5 at the back, the 2 defensive midfielders, the 2 attacking midfielders that play quite narrow, and a striker up top. And it's what they do with the wing-backs, where they push them high and wide, that makes it uncomfortable for the opposition teams. And if we jump into the visual against Nottingham Forest, you can see Martinez progressing up the pitch with the ball. There's no real press at the moment, and Nottingham Forest are kind of retreating back into their shape. And what they do is they use the attacking midfielder on the same side to pin the opposition fullback. And the main aim of this, and what they try and do to the opposition, is they try and drag the opposition winger into uncomfortable areas where they're not used to defending against that kind of run. But you can see the positioning and the body shape of Jota is all wrong. He's not really ready to run in behind or have that kind of half-turn shape where you can see Dalot's run. And Dalot times this perfectly. This is something they must be working on the training pitch, of when to make that run, especially when the player has time and space on the ball. Dalot makes a well-timed run and he's found well by Martinez. And you can see the kind of dilemma this causes, this direct ball over the top for the wing-back, especially if it's the winger that's tracking them. Because the opposition full-back is now out of place and it's the opposition centre-back that has to sort of step out from his position in the box. And if they time it right, they can cause an overload in the box. With the opposite wing-back attacking the back post, Fernandes in that attacking midfielder role, attacking the box as well. Højlund in that striker role, attacking the box. And Garnacho arriving late for a potential pullback on that side. You can get a situation here where you're trying to numerically overload the box from crosses. And the next pattern of play that Amorim has implemented is the old school up, back and through. And I'll show an example of this in a Nottingham Forest game. And you can see Dalot on the ball, trying to play out from the back. And Nottingham Forest playing this 4-2-4, 4-4-2 mid-block. And Ugarte is being screened well by Wood. But this is what Chelsea also do. They're not trying to play all the time to the feet of the defensive midfielders straight away from the centre-backs. They'll rather play up to one of the attacking midfielders, back to defensive midfielders who now have time on the ball because the opposition midfielders aren't close enough. And then you can sort of break against the opposition team. And that's what happens here. Fernandes pushing into that sort of half space in behind the opposition winger in Callum Hudson-Odoi. And Ugarte already sort of realises the situation as it's progressing. He makes a nice little subtle movement to make a sort of passing option for Fernandes. And Fernandes plays his first time, and it's important his first time to sort of take advantage of the overload that they've created in the centre of the pitch. The 4 attackers are out of the game. The defensive midfielders are separated because they're man marking Garnacho and Fernandes. And so there's a big space in the middle of the pitch for Ugarte to then progress with the ball. Højlund makes a lovely run in between the centre-backs to drag players away, but also create an option for the pass. And also Garnacho makes a lovely run in between the centre-back and the right-back. Ugarte plays a lovely ball into Garnacho, and he's unable to take his chance, but it rebounds out to Højlund, who takes it. But these are the kind of sort of situations that Amorim is sort of building when he tries to play in that sort of up, back and through system. And the attacking fluidity and patterns of play have definitely developed, comparing that game against Ipswich all the way through to Nottingham Forest. The build-up is developing. They're starting to understand what Amorim wants. And, the XG they created against Nottingham Forest was the highest of Amorim's tenure so far. Now make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and hit the notification bell so you're there for the new videos when they're released. And stick around for the bonus segment where I'll be analysing the best Man United 11 team to face Manchester City in the derby. But there's some key defensive weaknesses that Amorim has to address to make sure he gets those results over the short term and ensures he's there for the long term. And the 3 key areas that are being exposed on the defensive side of the game are the wide areas, being exposed by the attacking midfielder on the opposition team, which sets up a direct run in between the centre-backs of Manchester United. And lastly, the most obvious one, the one that's had the worst effect on their goals conceded, is their set pieces. And the first one up is when they're being exposed in wide areas. And it happens in two situations. The first of which is when they're trying to initiate that high press. It's that wing back that's being pinned by opposition wingers. That means that the opposition is able to get out and build from the back quite easily. And the second is direct balls over the top of the wing back, especially on Ahmad's side. And if we jump into the first visual in the Arsenal game, and it's where Fernandes was playing in that sort of defensive midfield role alongside Ugarte. And in this situation, he's attempted to press Partey as he's about to receive the ball from Raya. And he bounces the ball back to Raya, who passes it out wide to Kivior. And you can see Zinchenko is the free man. And it's the easy out ball. And what you would expect here is the wing back, who's Dalot in this case, to push up to Zinchenko. And then it would be quite a nice situation for Man United where they box Arsenal on that left-hand side of the pitch. Both Mount and Ugarte are trying to push Dalot forward. But what they can't see is that he's being pinned by the opposition winger in Martinelli. But this is where Man United have to improve in that defensive rotation. Dalot could be encouraged to press and leave Martinelli there, because that would, even if it goes to Zinchenko's feet, he's not going to be able to sort of pass that ball through to Martinelli. And even if he does, Manchester United need to learn how to rotate that back line. They have superiority on that side of the pitch, so they can leave the opposition winger in Saka free and move the whole back line across, with the right centre-back picking up Martinelli and Dalot being able to press higher up the pitch. And the next situation that they get exposed in these wide areas is down Ahmad's side, and it's when you force him to be a defender. And in a game against Ipswich, you can see that the centre-back has the ball under little pressure, and Leif Davis decides to make a little run in behind, and that's when the ball's just dropped over the top, in behind Ahmad, who's sort of lost track of the run from Davis. Davis uses the momentum of Ahmad to cut the ball back and leave him trailing behind him. And this is where he's able to open up the pitch for the cross, cut it back to, Dalot on the edge of the box. But Dalot makes a lovely little run in behind Evans, and he's found very well from Davis. And we'll come on to it in the bonus segment where I name the best 11 to face Man City. But this is the kind of situation that the likes of Doku and Savio would love. That space in behind Ahmad. Man United might play a bit deeper, but if you time it right, you can get in behind Ahmad, similar to what Man United were doing with Dalot against Nottingham Forest. Now, the second situation that Amorim has to address is when the opposition number 10, or the players floating in between Man United's midfield and defensive line, are able to receive the ball, turn, and then there's a striker or attacking midfielder making runs directly in between the centre-backs. And if we look at the game against Everton, if you're able to separate Mainu, Ugarte, the two defensive midfielders for Man United, and find someone in between that midfield and defensive line that can turn and face the defensive line of Man United, there's big problems, especially if they have a powerful runner with pace. Something like Højlund, for example, that's coming up next for Manchester United. And if we analyse the visual from the game, you can see Gay has the ball and he pops that ball back. And instead of staying in the central area and trying to outnumber there, he then moves a little bit wider into that little half space. And what that does is it attracts Mainu and draws him away from his kind of settled midfield position. And you can see then the gap that sort of appears between Mainu and Casemiro. And Dwight Manil is doing this time and time again, drifting into these positions in behind the midfield too. And that's when he's able to turn. And this is where the next problem occurs for Manchester United. McNeil plays a lovely ball in between the centre-backs. And to be honest with you, I really do like Dalot. I think he has a good defensive nous about him, good body shapes in this situation, but he doesn't have that top speed. And that's where the likes of, Beto in this example, but I'm thinking more along the lines of Haaland and the type of runs he likes to make. This will be a dangerous situation for Man United to encounter in the derby. But it's the set pieces that have been the major problem so far. They've conceded 6 goals and 3 of them have been set pieces, with 2 goals against Arsenal and 1 against Nottingham Forest. And the main problem is that they're the first goals that are scored in those games. When you're conceding that first goal to a set piece, you're then on the back foot and trying to claw your way back into games. It doesn't matter if they're small, they have to block the runs, they have to be competitive in disrupting the opposition. And Onana maybe has to take a bit more responsibility to catch the ball if it arrives in and around the 6-yard box. So if Amorim can sort out these 3 defensive situations and build on the patterns of play that they've built in the attacking phase of the game, then they'll build that confidence and the ability to obtain short-term results, which will keep him there for for the long term. And on to the bonus segment where I'll be picking the best 11 for Man United to pick against Man City. And it'll obviously be influenced by the team that they select in the Europa League game midweek in terms of the fitness levels. But I'll take a stab at it in terms of who I think are the best players to play in the game. Now, Amorim has changed his lineup multiple times over the course of his first 4 games in the Premier League and the 1 game in the Europa League. But if you look at the sort of likely starters, you probably put Onana at goalkeeper, Dalot at that middle centre-back role, and Martinez in that left centre-back role. And from what I've seen so far, based on what you probably need in an away game, in a derby, to handle that ball under the pressure, the likes of Ugarte and Mainu should start in that defensive midfield role. Fernandes will definitely start and probably be in that right attacking midfield role. But there's a couple of positions up for grabs in the game. And we'll start with the right-sided centre-back position. And it's probably between Yoro and Mazraoui. And there's so many factors that will go into this decision. I'm sure the fitness levels of Yoro maybe aren't at to the sort of level that you would want in a derby game. You don't want to be making subs or known subs in the 65th, 70th minute. Although Amorim has done it so far, so you can't sort of rule it out. You've got Mazraoui's experience, which I think is key in a game like this. You know, he's used to the big games. He seems very composed and makes really good decisions in games. But then you've got the height of Yoro, which where they've been struggling from set pieces, you think that might be an extra benefit over Mazraoui. But as you saw in that game against Nottingham Forest, you know, he lost out in the sort of back post battle with Chris Woods, not being able to track the run and got underneath the ball. And I don't think his main strength is being able to head it, even though he is fairly tall. And I personally start Mazraoui. I don't think the height of Yoro and his aerial ability quite nudges Mazraoui out of the team. I think Mazraoui's experience, which will be important in this game, he makes good decisions on the pitch. You know, for someone that's brought in as a utility player, I think he's shown that he can step up and be a first-team player. He's good on the ball. And I think, especially in that situation, you know, that kind of visual that I showed you against Arsenal, where you're playing balls, you know, in behind the attacking midfielder, and you need your team in the back line to rotate around, allow Dalot to push forward. You need that right-sided centre-back to be comfortable in that wide area, especially against Man City. And I think that's where it sort of edges it for me for Mazraoui to start in this game. And next up, and probably the trickiest one for him, is the wing-back positions. And I don't mean tricky in terms of the decision, but more the expectation around who should start. Because I think Ahmad's played so well, he probably deserves to play in this game, especially because he was dropped in that game against Arsenal, which was a big game away from home. You know, it's one where you probably want a counter-attacking threat down that side. And that's probably why I put Mazraoui in behind him that can cover in that right-back spot if he's caught higher up the pitch. But like I said, it was a big game against Arsenal, and Amorim sort of decided to go with 2 conventional wing-backs in Malacia and Dalot. And he might choose to do it again, be a bit more defensive-minded, and especially if he's anticipating the likes of Doku and Savio starting in the game. But I think, given his form, you know, the suspect defending of Guardiola, I think that Ahmad has to start in this game, and you adjust the defensive shape around that. And I'll combine the debate on the last 2 positions into one, because they revolve around one player, and that's Marcus Rashford. I think in a big game against Man City, a derby rival, you know, and the kind of experience that he's had in previous games at the Etihad, where he's able to nick a couple of goals and be a threat on the counter, that is a key decision that, you know, Amorim has to take into consideration, especially when you see the likes of Garnacho probably not being in the best form, and that role doesn't really suit him in that left-sided number 10 role. But it's about where you put Rashford as well. Do you start Højlund or do you start Rashford up top? You know, do you want Rashford doing that defensive work, which he's not really great at doing in a high press or in a mid-block, where you're leaving space and gaps in and around him for the opposition in Man City to exploit? So it's a tricky one for Amorim. I personally think that he'll start Højlund up front. I think Højlund's done quite well in terms of his runs in behind. His general link-up play has been good. And I think the threat of Marcus Rashford, you know, drifting out to that left side from that left number 10 position, you know, he's only currently played in that right number 10 position and up front. And I think it'll be good to experiment with him in that sort of left number 10 position where he can drift, make runs in behind, you know, that right back and right centre back of Man City. And I think he could be a threat on the counter-attack as well. And so my best 11 to play Man City would be Onana in goal, Ahmad at right wing back, Mazraoui in that right centre back role, Dalot in the middle centre back role, and Martinez in the left centre back, with Dalot at left wing back. You've got Ugarte and Mainu in the defensive midfield roles, Fernandes in that right number 10 role, Rashford in the left number 10 role, and Højlund up top. If Amorim can make the right decisions in those key positions, then it could be the difference between a statement victory in a derby or a tough lesson at the Etihad. And while his approach to the build-up play in the attacking phase of the game shows promise, the defensive liabilities are still a concern, especially with a game against Man City on the horizon. Make sure to check out a couple of my other tactical breakdowns from other Premier League clubs this season. Make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. And I'll see you on the next episode of A Game with Two Halves.